Hi, everybody. Today I'm going to cover if Bitcoin's cycles, its boom and bust cycle, are lengthening, and I'll give you some insight that I have in terms of looking at different charts and talking to different people in the space to where I think that this might be a plausible theory. Before we begin, I want to give a shout out to Ledn. Ledn is one of the best places to borrow against your Bitcoin using it as collateral or lending it out and earning a yield. They're one of my partners. Definitely recommend that you check them out. Okay, cool. Let's go ahead and switch on over to the newsletter. I write this first, by the way, so all these topics I cover on my YouTube channel, I write about first on Thursdays. So if you want these first, if you want to hear about it first, sign up to the Held Report. The link is below in the description. Okay, cool. So background for some of y'all who may not know me, this is my third Bitcoin cycle. I was around for the 13, 17, and 2021 cycles. And every time I think I know how it's going to play out, it does something different. You never really know where the price is going to go. And if I did, I'd be a trillionaire. That's why I choose to, my personal preference is to hodl because I'm not sure where the direction is going to go. But I do know that long-term Bitcoin has tremendous value for the world. And I think that at its current price, it's very undervalued compared to how much, being digital gold how much value that will bring to the world. So in this newsletter, I'm going to give you, or in this video, I'm going to give you a primer on kind of the basic functions of why prices move up and down and how these cycles play out, and then look to some different analysts in the space to see if they think that Bitcoin cycle is lengthening. So some kind of common touch points here on human psychology. There's a lot of similarities between the cycles. You've got a halving event, which means that Bitcoin's supply of newly minted Bitcoin drops in half. And that occurred in 16, 20. And so there's a corresponding boom cycle that occurs. And so what that means is simply that supply is decreased, a fresh supply of newly minted coins decreases. And if demand increases or stays the same, the price starts to move up. Just very simple supply and demand. And what's really interesting too is, these swings are very much driven by human psychology. It's the raw human emotion that you see reflected in that price. And no matter how much it goes up or down, the macro backdrop of money printer go burr, we can't trust our governments with money, and then we're not going to go back to the gold standard or fix our deficit, really give Bitcoin's long-term value prop, I think, kind of a clear perspective. And what's interesting too is Bitcoin every single time. I remember when I got in and I thought $100 of Bitcoin was expensive, and then $1,000 of Bitcoin is expensive, and then 10,000, and now we keep hitting these different mental thresholds, and then it feels like before it was super cheap. And so it's really interesting seeing that play out in 13, 17, and now. Also really interesting to see kind of the infrastructure and like the exchange infrastructure become much more resilient and one that can handle, really big amounts of institutional traders. So let's dive into a little bit of the price and why the price moves. So there's a common term called a viral loop. I'm sure you've heard about it before, where people talking about like a piece of content or product going viral. That means there's like a huge exponential growth. And what that means too is that like people tell other people that tell other people, and that's how that content gets propagated. So most of us heard about Bitcoin in 2013, 2017, or now because friends and family were talking about it. And it's through that rapid price increase that they usually talk about it. And so the price is the signal to folks that Bitcoin is interesting, solves a problem for them, and other people are recognizing it as legitimate new money. If Bitcoin's price had stayed at $100 or $1,000, none of us would be here. You wouldn't be watching this YouTube video. That volatility exists, but typically over long-term trends, that volatility pushes Bitcoin's price upwards, which is why more and more people hear about Bitcoin, more and more people get into Bitcoin and realize Bitcoin's value. Satoshi actually hypothesized that this would be the primary way that people get into Bitcoin. This is a quote from him where he says, as the number of users grow, the value per coin increases. It has the potential for a positive feedback loop. As users grow, the value goes up, which could attract more users to take advantage of the increasing value. He wrote that before Bitcoin was worth a penny, which is pretty wild. And if we look at Bitcoin's halvings, so those are these events. So the orange line is Bitcoin's inflation rate, basically issuance schedule of newly minted coins. And you can see that rate dropping over time in these very distinct events. And these are called halvings, where there's a distinct moment when Bitcoin's issuance, newly minted Bitcoins per block gets halved. And then you get the corresponding price of Bitcoin. And so as you can see, you get a halving event, price boom, halving event, price boom, and halving event. And we saw a a decent sized bull run, but definitely I feel like we're all kind of like waiting for something bigger there. And this viral loop is how the core component of Bitcoin market cycles. If you want to learn more, check out The Price of Bitcoin, what I wrote a little while ago, where it dives in even more deeply how these cycles are the singular function, and the price is the singular function that brings in more user adoption, liquidity, funding, security, and core development. Before we begin, I want to give a shout out to Choice, one of my sponsors. As most of you know, when you hodl, you don't have to pay taxes. But what if I told you that you could hodl, and when you eventually sell your Bitcoin, you wouldn't have to pay any taxes then? Well, I didn't think that was possible until I found Choice IRA. Choice is the best retirement account to set up for Bitcoiners that lets you buy and hold Bitcoin in stocks without paying a dime to the government. And how does that work? Choice is an IRA. They have IRAs and Roth IRAs, which means it's a special type of retirement account where you don't pay taxes if you hodl until a certain age, along with some other stipulations. And the best part, you can self-custody your Bitcoin with Choice, which means that you don't have to trust Choice or anyone else with your Bitcoin or your private keys. It's the perfect retirement solution for Bitcoiners. The best time to start stacking sats was 11 years ago. The second best time is today. Search StackSats in the App Store or choiceapp.io/held. Link is included in the description below. Go check it out right now. So the reason why you're here, why you're paying attention to this is you're going, Dan, well, what's happening with this cycle? Are cycles becoming longer, shorter? What's going on? Well, no one knows. So as a caveat, no one knows. But I do think some of these things are interesting to think about in terms of the cycle maybe growing longer. And so during the bear market, a lot of people hypothesize that the bull run could take longer. So for example, this was laid out by a technical analysis trader on Twitter, where he observed each cycle here and how long, essentially how long these cycles lasted. And this cycle is lasting, it looks to be lasting quite a bit longer. Now, what's interesting is that he wrote this in 2019. So that's why I picked this, as it was written before he saw what happened in the last 2 years really play out. And so his prediction is that it peaks in December 2022 at a price of like $130,000 a Bitcoin. So this isn't a singular individual who has this theory. A lot of people have had this theory as well. And so we do see indeed this hypothesis is directionally correct. And we won't really know until after it happens. It either happens or it doesn't. And, you know, we didn't really see that peak that we thought might happen in 2021. But if we look at these cycles, and this is from Bitcoin Magazine, you know, we see these cycles lengthening out. You know, 2021 could be the same thing where like that cycle becomes longer and longer. And what happens here is that, you know, we see a peak happen maybe late 2022 or mid 2022. The thing is, Bitcoin's crazy volatile, and that's exactly why I hodl. I have no idea where it's going to go month over month. We look at historical data, we look at what's happening in the world, and I'm still super bullish on where Bitcoin's at. But that's what's really interesting about this cycle, which I think is very on point, that the cycles are lengthening. A lot of people talked about this over the last couple of years. Due to the early start of the bull run in early 2021, I think a lot of people thought, oh, the cycle isn't lengthening. Well, as we saw as it played out, maybe the cycle is indeed lengthening. It's going to take a little bit longer to hit the peak of that bull run. And so here's some other analysis as well by BTC Fuel, which looks at price and UTXO movement. So kind of like chunkifying the different movements of prices over time and then playing those out over longer and longer time periods. So this is also really interesting to take a look at, where if you look at us versus previous cycles, the third and fourth cycle haven't played out yet. So maybe that happens later on in 2022 or early 2023. And if we look at the realized cap HODL waves, so HODL waves represent different cohorts of UTXOs, so basically different cohorts of hodlers and how those coins have moved over time. And we didn't really see a typical pattern of what we saw here in these three cycles. In this fourth cycle, which is the one we're in now, we haven't really seen these different kind of like big sell-off events where people start to move coins and sell them en masse because the price is going up so high. So, you know, on-chain data and price data do point to a longer cycle potentially happening, maybe late 2022, in terms of like the peak of the bull run. Or we could be in a bear, but I still find that very unlikely given the macro environment, given that we didn't have a blow off top and a couple other factors. So if the cycles are lengthening, what does that mean for Bitcoin long term? If the halving doesn't have a corresponding cycle, how does it impact Bitcoin? Well, Bitcoin has entered the mainstream macroeconomic arena. mainstream institutions and investors are now looking at it, which means that that information or expectation of what Bitcoin will be is being priced in sooner in the market. We could see, and this is what I hypothesized with the super cycle theory, is that we could see a break from the norm with Bitcoin cycles, with like these, with the normal duration or the normal price run up or downturn. And so, that's where we could see this kind of more long sideways chop. And the super cycle sort of touches on, like, what if it's different? And this time is certainly different. So I think this very much falls into that realm of like, what if we have a more sideways market? Then in late 2022, we have another big bull run. Maybe it's like 2013 where we had 2 bull runs, but maybe this took a lot longer to play out. So I'm not sure where it's going, but it should be super interesting to see how this plays out here. I think that I still think that the bull run's still on. A lot of people feel bearish because of the recent price action, but Bitcoin still solves a huge problem that's needed in the world. A lot of the macro backdrop in terms of short-term trading, people are a little bit fearful. Bitcoin's kind of looked at as like a little bit of a risk on and risk off asset, so people are selling off assets. Long term, I think I'm super bullish on Bitcoin long term, and I think that in the next couple months here, if that bearish sentiment turns more bullish, Bitcoin's in a prime spot to potentially have another run up. So I'm not sure where the price is going to go, but this was really interesting. I wanted to share it with you all. If you found this interesting, throw me a like or subscribe. Really helps with the algorithm to get this content out to more people. And thank you for watching. Cheers.